It's your Thursday daily delivery. I'm Michael Rand. Hope you guys are having a good day out there today. We got lots to get to on today's show. Chris Hine, Timberwolves beat writer from the Tribune, joins me here in a little while to talk all things Wolves. All things, that is, except Anthony Edwards. I'll get to that in a little bit. The incident after Game 5. Chris and I recorded before that became a thing, but I will get into that a little bit later after I talk to Chris. We got some other NBA stuff, a little bit of Wild stuff, some Twins stuff. First, though, what did I miss? It is big time in the NFL right now. Two things on my mind. Not surprisingly, one of them, Aaron Rodgers, introduced at his news conference with the Jets on Wednesday, had a quote that I thought was interesting. And, of course, the NFL draft starts tonight, and the Vikings with some pretty interesting expectations this year. Maybe I will start there. Only have 5 picks, right? Number 23 overall, then all the way down to 87. Just 5 picks total. But anytime you introduce the potential that they could take a quarterback into the equation, the draft has a heightened air to it. And we haven't been there for it really in earnest for quite some time, right? Because I'd say, 2021, there started to be a little bit of speculation. Would they move up, maybe take Justin Fields? That was, at least a rumor for a while. And they did take Kellen Mond in the 3rd round that year. But a 3rd round pick is not the same level of investment as potentially a 1st round pick. We haven't been there with this team, at least during the Kirk Cousins era. And, probably before that. Not since they took Teddy Bridgewater have they really been in a spot where you thought they are going to draft a quarterback, that they need to draft a quarterback, that they need to start over at that position. So almost a decade. That Teddy draft was 2014. Almost a decade since they've been in that spot. And anytime you start to talk about, could they do this, could they do that? Ben Gessling, we talked with Ben. Andrew Kramer and I talked with Ben about his Vikings mock draft on the Access Vikings podcast a couple days ago. He has them moving up, 10, 12 spots to get a shot at Anthony Richardson, the Florida quarterback, which I thought was interesting. It at least shows their mindset, shows an offensive-minded head coach like Kevin O'Connell. He used to be, of course, an offensive coordinator before he was head coach. Swinging for the fences, maybe wanting a quarterback that he can put his stamp on, that he can help grow into a star in this league. Not just a placeholder, not just an above-average quarterback, but a star in this league, someone who can elevate this franchise to a Super Bowl. And I think that was a big piece of the O'Connell hire. I think they liked a lot about his organizational skills, his collaboration, his demeanor, things like that. But at the end of the day, quarterback is the most important position on the field. The Vikings had not had an offensive-minded head coach in more than a decade because they had Mike Zimmer and Leslie Frazier before him. You have to go back to Brad Childress before you really get to, that quarterback whose stamp was offense. And let's be honest, that was the closest the Vikings have been to the Super Bowl, really in the last, 15, 20 years when Childress was here. I know they got to the NFC title game in 2017, but they got absolutely destroyed in that game. They were a play away from the Super Bowl with Brad Childress back in 2009. And of course, that was with Brett Favre. That's a different, not developing your own quarterback, but an offensive-minded coach in this day and age is important, I think, especially if you have to draft a quarterback. And I don't think the Vikings have to draft a quarterback this year because they do have Kirk Cousins under contract for another season. But if their plan is to play out, if they don't want to have to play a rookie right away, it does make a lot of sense that they draft someone this year, let them sit for a season underneath Cousins, and then take over in 2024. It just makes a lot of sense. You don't necessarily want to play a quarterback right away. It has to be someone pretty special if they are going to play right away. So this draft is pretty fascinating from that regard. They have a lot of needs. They don't have a lot of picks. Quarterback is potentially one of those needs. And if the board falls a certain way tonight, you could imagine them getting up and getting to a quarterback. Now, you can also imagine them doing any number of things. You can imagine them taking a corner, a wide receiver, a pass rusher. You could see them trading down, trading out of the first round entirely to get more picks in future years and saying, hey, you know what? I know we've got a lot of needs right now, but we've got a lot of needs in the future as well. Maybe the quarterback we want is in next year's draft, not this year's draft. I don't know. All of it combines to make this a pretty interesting draft for me to watch, for you to watch if you are a Vikings fan. And I'm sure we will all be there tonight seeing what they do at 23 or wherever they ultimately land in the first round. Now, like I said, Aaron Rodgers also on my mind, as he often is. He'll recede from my brain space as he's further away with the Jets. We'll be watching what he does from afar. But I thought it was interesting. He had a lot of quotes, a lot of memorable quotes from his introductory news conference with the Jets, but one of those things was saying the Lombardi Trophy, the one Lombardi Trophy NFL championship that the Jets have won, the Super Bowl III, saying it's looking a little lonely, in saying basically let's go win another one, and that's a good line, but it also speaks to me about two things. One, obviously what he's brought in for it, not just to be, a guy that can help them win a few games, but a guy that ostensibly could help the Jets win a Super Bowl. And they tried that again with Brett Favre 15 years ago. That did not work, but this is a better Jets team, and I think this is a better quarterback that they're getting than when they got Brett Favre around the same age 15 years ago. Number two, I wonder if there's some self-reflection in that as well for Rodgers, who himself has only won one Super Bowl, and that was several years ago. That was 13 years ago now that he won his first Super Bowl. Turned out to be his only Super Bowl. Turned out to be his only Super Bowl appearance so far. A quarterback that good, who's been on teams that good with Green Bay, has not made it back to the Super Bowl since very early in his career. It was his third year as a starter in 2010. They kind of came out of nowhere, ran the table as a wild card, won the Super Bowl, and you thought, man, this is a guy that's going to get back there many, many more times in his career. He has not gotten back there before. So I'm wondering if there's some self-reflection in that quote as well. Time will tell. We'll see how good the Jets are with Aaron Rodgers and how good Aaron Rodgers is for the Jets. But I found that to be an interesting piece of what he said on Wednesday. Twins, by the way, absolutely shellacked by the Yankees in the last game of the series. Kenta Maeda gives up 10 runs in 3 innings. Going to have to go on the injured list. Again, it sounds like some struggles early on as he tries to come back from Tommy John surgery. Still won the series with the Yankees, still won the season series with the Yankees for the first time in 22 years, but that's a wrench in their early season pitching plan. However, Bailey Ober waiting in the wings. Have to imagine he fits nicely into that last spot in the rotation. Pitched well when given a chance a few days ago. Has pitched well in his Twins career. If he can kind of bump up his innings, continue to progress, continue to be a guy who could get into the 6th and 7th inning instead of the 4th, 5th inning, he could anchor. He could help anchor. What's becoming a pretty good Twins rotation with obviously Pablo Lopez, Joe Ryan, Sonny Gray. Even Tyler Malley's pitched pretty well this year too. So if you can go through that rotation and not have the Maeda spot, which has been a weak spot so far, and maybe some of that's health, if you can have that not be a weak spot, that only makes the team stronger overall. So we will see what they do to patch that hole. Lost against the Yankees, but overall 2 out of 3 against the Yankees. They will take that any day because they have not done that in a very long time consistently.
Take a playcation to Mystic Lake. With 24/7 gaming, the good times never have to end. And you can satisfy your cravings at our restaurants and bars. Or relax in one of our luxurious hotel rooms. Those that play together, stay together. And don't forget to join Club M so you can spark new memories and bask in the rewards along the way. Follow the lights to Mystic Lake, where every day is play day.
I've got Chris Hine, Timberwolves beat writer, with me of his own free will, has joined the Daily Delivery podcast again, coming off of 89 games, Chris, where we learned a lot, maybe didn't learn enough about the twin bigs pairing of Karl-Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert, because over the course of the year, Towns missed 52 games with that leg injury, that calf strain. But the season is now over. We'll hear more from players on Thursday when they kind of reflect on things, exit interviews and such. But Chris, for now, you're back from Denver. You've had a chance to absorb the playoffs, the play-in, the regular season. Maybe give me the overview of what was the mood after it all ended from the team, and B, kind of how do you kind of take a global view of this now that it's all over?
It's always an interesting mood when a season is over. I think that in the immediate aftermath, there's disappointment, obviously, and then there's kind of a I don't know, maybe a catharsis or something like that, where you don't have to go through the ringer anymore, and so there's a little bit of I don't know, not relief isn't the word, but it's not always total disappointment. Um, you know, I think for Anthony Edwards, it was total disappointment, though, just based on his mood and kind of reactions and comments last night. Same for Karl-Anthony Towns as well. Um, you know, those guys I thought put up a really good fight in Game 5. They were undermanned, shorthanded because of all the injuries, and they were right there. And they had the lead early, they gave it up, but still were there at the end. Almost forced a Game 6. You always play the game of coulda, shoulda, woulda, especially as it pertains to some of the personnel that they were missing. And is it a different series if Naz Reid and Jaden McDaniels are out there for the whole series? Maybe they win another game. Maybe it doesn't make much of a difference. Who knows? But in general, disappointment. I think would be a good summary of what happened last night, but also has like a very last day of school kind of vibe as well. I guess that's kind of the word I'm looking for. Is like, yeah, it's like everybody's kind of, you may not see some people again for for a long time. Some people are going to be going their separate ways, and they're saying goodbyes and things like that. And you don't know what the future holds, so you want to make sure you tell people hey, appreciate you, and we'll see you down the road perhaps.
One of the things you and I talked about before we started recording is, Chris Finch in his, final post-game availability did talk quite a bit about, optimism that the Gobert Towns pairing can work. And, we saw maybe slightly better evidence of that in spurts in the postseason, certainly more than we saw at the beginning of the year. We saw it in some spots during the end of the regular season as well. The overall numbers don't so much bear that out, but he's at least saying the right things and saying that he needs to do more and can do more to get more out of that group, especially offensively. What do you make of that set of comments from Finch?
Yeah, it was a little surprising that I think he said they have enough of a body of work to evaluate kind of what they have. That surprised me a little bit, because I didn't think that they did, or that they might say that. But apparently what was it, maybe 20 plus games plus the playoffs and things like that they played together was enough to kind of figure out where they need to go with this pairing. To listen to Finch talk about it, it's not like they're going to be breaking this duo up anytime soon. We'll hear from Tim Connolly on Thursday when they do their exit interviews, and we'll see what he has to say about everything going forward here. But Finch was very optimistic about this pairing, and he's going to be spending the offseason trying to come up with ways to, as he said, maximize their potential. Now, I don't know that that's what the fan base wants to hear. As I think some people want to blow it up. They want to cut their losses, trade one of them, figure it out from there. But at least from last night, the tone is that this is going to be run back for another season.
Yeah, and that I can see some of the logic of that. I also look at kind of the more immediate, whether it's rational, irrational, stat based, whatever it is. You look at it, and you look at someone like Karl-Anthony Towns, who's been here for 8 years. He's been to the playoffs 3 times. They've won 4 playoff games, I believe, in his tenure, 0 playoff series. You look at that and you say, is this a franchise player? You look at how the pairing of the two bigs in a limited sample size, but one that Chris Finch even himself says is representative, or at least gives them enough to work with, that was not great. And then you look at some bigger picture salary stuff, and I'm having a hard time figuring out now if you're going to build this whole thing around Anthony Edwards, which I think a lot of us agree at this point is kind of if you're going to be great, it's going to be a team that's got Ant as your number one, and everything needs to kind of fit around him. And just kind of looking at this from a salary standpoint and from a structural standpoint, next year they're okay because, Towns is still on his large but not ridiculous contract. Ant and Jaden McDaniels are still on their rookie contracts. They've got guys like Kyle Anderson still under contract for a reasonable amount. You've still got another year of Mike Conley under contract. But you look at it, and 2 years from now, Chris, Ant is going to be on a 5-year, probably $204 million extension. Jaden McDaniels might be on a 5-year, $100 million deal. Cat's Supermax kicks in. That's an extra $14 million a year that he's going to be making in 2024-25. Don't you feel like I'm speaking out loud, not asking, I'm not trying to convince you, but doesn't it seem like this might be the time from a practical standpoint to at least explore a Towns trade? Because do you really want to be paying him $50 million in 2 years? And can you meaningfully upgrade the roster any other way except via a Cat trade?
Yes, it is the time to think about a Cat trade. And I think I'll be exploring that a little later. But I think this is the time to do it if you're going to do it, and not next season when you have to figure out more salary potentially coming back in a trade like that. If one of the reasons why you're going to do it is a financial reason, you might have to trade him now and figure out a way to get some of that money off your books in 2 years.
Right.
So, you trade him and get some expiring deals in that potentially, or however you want to work it. But yeah, that's the decision they have to make. And maybe you punt it down the road for another year and figure out a way to do it then, because you want to give this a shot next season, which I think is probably what's going to happen. I don't think that they are going to punt on the too big experiment after just one kind of abbreviated look at what it looked like because of Towns' injury. But yes, from a bookkeeping standpoint, from a timeline standpoint, and all that, it does make sense to seriously think about that moving forward. But I don't get the sense sitting here right now that that's what they're going to do, at least this year.
Yeah, and I get that. I think that's fair. And there always is that kind of halfway point between doing it this summer and doing it a summer after, which is, some kind of trade deadline move when he's still on that contract that he's on right now. That gets complicated. You probably got less of a market then than you do in an off season. But I guess some of it does come down to what your internal belief is in how they can maximize these two players. And part of it to me is it seems like Ant at times has struggled offensively when both of those guys were on the floor. Now, you can look at this playoff series and say he kind of figured it out to a certain degree. He had, those last 4 games of the playoff series, he went over 30 3 times, and he had 29, I believe, in game 5, and was at least efficient enough, got to the basket a lot, things like that. So maybe he's closer to finding his space in that offense. But to me, one of the things about this that that kind of worries me is that it does not feel like a too big lineup maximizes Anthony Edwards. Do you feel like they're getting closer to figuring out how to unlock him fully, even with those 2 bigs out there?
A good question. And I think it's one of the most important questions that they have to answer, because I think ultimately number one on your priority list as a franchise has to be maximizing Anthony Edwards. And I think, as we saw, I don't think this trade has done that throughout the course of the season. Ant had his best stretch of the season when Karl was out, and that turned him into an all-star for the first time. He came back, and it took him a while to get back in rhythm, and he found it for the playoffs. Maybe that has something to do with the matchup. Nikola Jokic was not really challenging him too much at the rim when he was able to get there. And other teams, that might be a different story. So I think the matchup in the playoffs was beneficial for Ant to help him thrive. But on a night-to-night basis and potentially against other Western Conference opponents, I don't know that Ant necessarily has the same success with the current iteration of this lineup. So That's another thing I think this franchise has to ask itself is how are we helping Anthony Edwards become the absolute best player that he can become? And, as of right now, I don't know that answer is that they're really fully maximizing him. And I think he, in my estimation, is more important to maximize than Karl-Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert moving forward.
Yeah, I agree. And I kind of go back and forth on what the best path is forward. And, I guess I would watch next year. I'm gonna watch anyway, but I would watch another attempt at making the two bigs work. But I do feel like ultimately the best chance they have at an identity is built around Ant and then the defense of Jaden and Gobert and some other pieces around them facilitated by a cat trade. But we might not be there yet, and maybe they will decide to stay the course, and maybe that will prove fruitful enough that they try to keep this core together in another way. And what we saw again, though, in these playoffs and part of the regular season, Chris, is that as much as we talk about the big three or the starters, roster spots 8 through 13 can be pretty important too. And I think you saw that in this series where when their depth was tested, they just didn't have a whole lot of kind of reserves that they could really trust. And maybe you can say that about a lot of NBA rosters. I felt like the Wolves were kind of in this weird space this year where they were deep until they got injuries, which is kind of a weird thing to say, but basically like, they're 1 through 9 or they're 1 through 10. If everybody was reasonably healthy, the rotation was pretty good, but once they hit some tougher injury spots, they were in some rough shape. And obviously when you lose guys like Jaden McDaniels, Naz Reid, and then in game 5, Kyle Anderson, 3 guys that are in your top 7 or 8 players, you're going to suffer no matter what. But some of the bigger offseason decisions they have to make aren't just about Karl-Anthony Towns or the future of kind of the big three. It's guys like Nickeil Alexander-Walker who showed up nicely after the D'Angelo Russell trade. It's guys like Naz Reid, who is an unrestricted free agent guy, backup point guard, I think is in play. How do you think they go about addressing those things this offseason, with the salary cap constraints that are going to be looming ahead in mind as well?
Just kind of looking at the landscape, I would expect Alexander Walker to probably come back. He's a restricted free agent, so the Wolves control whether they can match offers or not. Restricted free agency is always a dicey gamble for other teams to try and enter. So, and I think the Wolves really like him. I think he likes it here. He's gotten one of the best opportunities he's gotten recently in his career. So I think that there's a lot of momentum there to have him come back. As for Naz Reid, that is the mystery of the offseason to me. That is the number one thing that I don't know what's going to happen there. I tend to think that Naz is going to want to explore greater opportunity elsewhere where he can potentially be a starter for somebody. And if somebody's going to be throwing a decent amount of money at you and is going to say you're going to be our starting center, how do you say no to that? Here in Minnesota, you're still kind of behind 2 centers.
Yes.
even though before he got hurt, they were really integrating him more with Karl and with Rudy, and his minutes were up, and he was playing really, really well. Like probably the best basketball he's played in his career came in the 5 or 6 games right before he got hurt. He was phenomenal over those last 2 weeks there. But we'll see. It's going to be an interesting dynamic because not a lot of teams are in the position where they have the cap room to offer him a lot of money above the mid-level exception. The Wolves can do that because he's their own free agent and they have his bird rights.
Right. They can offer him up to 4 years and $58 million until free agency starts, right?
I'm not sure on the exact numbers of all that. I'd have to dig a little deeper into that, but just in general, they can offer him more money than a lot of teams are going to be able to offer him just because of their cap situation, and not being able to really go above the mid-level exception. There are teams out there that can offer him a lot of money, and does somebody out there like Naz Reid enough and see him as a potential starting center, that they're like, yeah, we'll fork over some of our cap space to sign you. Very possible. Very possible. I think he's got a lot of people that like him around the league. But I also think the Wolves really like him. And I think Tim Connolly really likes him too. So I'd expect the Wolves to try to re-sign him. Whether or not he ends up re-signing here, I think there's a lot of questions around that. But I think ultimately Nas wants the opportunity. He wants to show what he's got on a night-to-night basis. And I think he's here in Minnesota, for as well as he was playing, he's one bad week from being out of the rotation or seeing his minutes cut.
Yeah.
And if you go somewhere near the starting center, that's probably not going to happen to you. So a lot to think about for Naz Reid for the Timberwolves, and kind of how that all meshes together going forward.
Yeah, and I think it's pretty interesting, because you're right. I would say too that if he does end up re-signing here, that could be at least a signal or a precursor to how they're thinking about handling Towns down the road, or not. So we can, maybe we can infer that based on how Naz does. I mean, maybe it has nothing to do with it if you sign somewhere else for more money. That's just.
I mean, the other thing you can do is you can re-sign Naz Reid to a multi-year deal and then trade him after 1 year.
That's true.
That's something that can be on the table as well. And maybe he's a guy that can bring back some, a year down the road, bring back some assets for you if his value is still pretty high around the league.
Yeah. One thing I feel like they do, two things I feel like they need to address this offseason. One, they shot the ball okay this year. The volume of 3 points was way down from, they led the league in 3-point attempts per game a couple years ago. And then this year it was down more middle of the pack. Their percentage was okay. I think it was kind of close to middle of the pack. A lot of that's because their bigs shoot well. They don't really have like that one or two guys that just really scare you. At least among guys that are, 6'8" or shorter. A lot of their best shooters are like Towns and Naz Reid this year. And, to a degree, some of those other guys can shoot it pretty well. It'd be nice to get some more scoring and shooting out of their kind of wing type players. And, Jordan McLaughlin, let's not forget, it was 1 year removed from being the guy they trusted in Game 6 of the playoffs against Memphis, and in a lot of other stages of that series. Did not look like himself this season. A lot of that was his own calf strain. How do you feel like they address that notion of backup point guard? And some of it seems like they kind of got around it this year by using a lot of Ant and other guys as primary ball handlers to initiate their offense. But I don't know if that's always the answer.
Yeah, I don't. He's going to be making such a low amount of money next season on a team option that it'd be hard to fathom them not bringing him back. And, like you said, the calf injury might have been a big part of why he never got back to fully being himself. You hope maybe with an off season to recover, to rejuvenate, and to work out, that he becomes kind of the Jordan McLaughlin of last year and pre-injury. But I do think that, this is not me on any sourced information or anything like that, but just based on how much he will be making, which is like $2 million or so, give or take. Like, I don't know how you not bring him back for that amount of money. But who knows? We'll see what else is out there. Ant handled the ball, like you said. Kyle Anderson is a playmaker. Kyle Anderson will be back. He's on a 2-year deal. So he'll be back next season. And I haven't had the time to really dig into the point guard situation, who might be out there or what's out there. But I would expect, at least as of right now, that Jordan McLaughlin that option would be picked up at least.
We saw a couple more things for you, Chris. We saw in, a couple of minor but important stints to a degree. Their rookies, Wendell Moore Jr. and Josh Minot, got a little bit of run this year, and I don't imagine either one of those guys projected as major rotation contributors this season. But next year and beyond, they could become important, especially when you think about how they didn't have a draft pick in 2021. They don't currently have a first-round pick this year as the result of the Gobert trade. Those guys are kind of it for at least their own in-house developed players. I know they got, Luka Garza. He was a second round pick a couple of years ago that they brought in, and he's maybe got a little developmental potential. But as you think of those two guys, maybe not even quite next year, but 2024, 2025 beyond, does it seem like there is potential, a certain ceiling that they can get to, and maybe an organizational belief or thought of how those guys might project going forward?
Yeah, I think so. I think they're pretty happy with the progress both made throughout the season. Finch mentioned yesterday that he thought Wendell Moore has done a good job of kind of figuring out how the Wolves will need him to play moving forward. And, that's what the time in Iowa is for. Minot has, I think, improved from the day he got in the building, and trying to mold him into just smooth out the rough edges of his game, because the athleticism is there. I think he's a really good rebounder, and that's something that this team is going to need moving forward. And like you said, they're going to need, because of the cap situation, they're going to need guys who are on rookie type deals and smaller contracts to really contribute moving forward if they're going to round out this roster. So like you said, maybe not necessarily next year you're looking for these guys to be major contributors, but a year after that, yes. I think you'd like to see those guys cracking the rotation in 2 years when you have some of those decisions that you need to make around the salary cap.
Yeah. And final thing for you is, we've talked a lot about, external improvement, ways to change the roster, guys that might be coming, going, from as big as a potential Towns trade to kind of the minutia of the back end of the roster. Probably the biggest thing that will dictate what happens next year is some sort of internal improvement, probably the step forward they thought or hoped they would take this year in terms of maturity, in terms of being able to close out games. They still had, I think, 19 double-digit leads that evaporated into losses during the regular season. The Lakers game in the play-in, it was another example of, losing a late lead. Even this Denver game in Game 5, it was a first quarter lead, so you put an asterisk by it, but they were up 15 in that game, and all of a sudden that was gone quickly. Some of that, I think, speaks to the thing that Chris Finch keeps harping on, which is kind of a maturity, kind of a mental toughness or awareness. And I don't know whether the habits are, things like taking care of your body, not being up late, playing Call of Duty, or if it's in-game stuff. Do you have your finger on the pulse of anything like that? Or kind of when they talk about those things, what do they mean? And what hope is there that those things become better, even after they expected them maybe to get better this year?
I think it's probably more in-game things. I think you see problems just compound when a team goes on a run. And by that, I mean, let's say you're up double digits, somebody hits a three. All right, well, you come down, maybe you have a bad offensive possession, somebody forces up a shot or, forces up a three. And then all of a sudden the other team's running in transition. They get a layup and all of a sudden it's a 5-0 run for them. A 13-point lead is now down to 8.
Yeah.
You come down, you start playing a little tighter. Somebody tries to make a play because they want to stop the bleeding, and that ends up being a bad shot. And all of a sudden they're running down the floor again. And now it's a 6-point. And it's kind of what happened in Game 4 at the end of Game 4 the other night.
I was just thinking that, yeah.
Ant was trying to make a play, make a shot, and kind of stem the tide, save the run, whatever you want to say. And when you do stuff like that, you actually end up contributing to the other team's success more often than not. So I think it's just kind of managing runs, settling down, not getting flustered if a team makes 2 straight baskets on you, little things like that. And just keep running your offense, keep running what got you the lead in the first place. Keep playing like that. And I think sometimes they get out of character, they get out of themselves often when that happens. And, with a new group, a new group that's kind of played with each other for the first time, especially after Mike Conley comes in and is the new starting point guard, they're still trying to figure some of that stuff out, at the end of the day. So we'll see with an off season. If most of the personnel is back next year, we'll see if they're able to kind of iron out some of these issues in a training camp or in the preseason. And maybe next year is a little different, at least from that perspective.
Well, it should be a fascinating off season, but fortunately, there's at least a little bit of time here, Chris, where not much, knock on wood, should happen. You can take a little bit of a breather, a couple months before the draft and free agency start. Get some much needed downtime, some well deserved downtime. I'll leave you alone for a while as well.
I have a lot of TV shows that I have been just saving up to binge watch.
There you go.
And now I'm just going to be spending once I kind of clear this week. I will just be sitting in front of my TV, binge watching all these shows that I just have yet to watch, like Succession right now. Like I have successfully avoided all Succession spoilers. Wow. So I need to catch up because I want to watch the finale kind of live when it airs. So that's number one on my off-season to-do list right now.
Number two is obviously rewatching all 89 games, right?
I said I wanted to enjoy my off-season. I didn't want to relive the pain of this season.
Yeah, I'm just kidding. Well, Chris, appreciate it as always. We'll talk to you soon. Okay.
All right. Thanks, Mike.
Postscript to my conversation with Chris Hine. Of course, I tell him to get some rest, and then like 2 hours after he and I talked, news breaks that Anthony Edwards has been cited for third-degree assault after police say he swung a chair and injured 2 women after Game 5 against the Nuggets Tuesday in Denver. We've watched a little bit of what looks like the video of the incident. He swung that chair pretty good. I don't think there was any ill intent there, but he's leaving the court after the game. Not a very mature moment for him in general because, after a series, generally players stick around, say, hey, that was a hard-fought series, talk to their team, talk to their teammates, things like that. He bolted right after he missed that game-tying potential three-pointer, ran down the tunnel, and looked like he kind of grabbed a chair as he was going down there and swung it, and apparently he injured people, maybe not seriously, but there's some injuries along the way. Is scheduled to appear in court June 9th in Denver, according to the Star Tribune story. I don't see this as something that's going to be lingering for very long. It doesn't seem like it's a very serious thing, certainly no ill intent, but a final point, right, of this season of tempers flaring, of this team needing to gain some sort of emotional control, a certain level of maturity, which Chris and I talked about. Obviously on top of the Jaden McDaniels punching a wall, also in a tunnel, by the way, and Rudy Gobert taking a swing at teammate Kyle Anderson. You've got that. You've got all those pieces along the way, and now this, the very last act of the season, 3 seconds after the season ends. So I don't know. I'm not going to make too much of this. I don't think this is a terribly serious situation, but it is another piece of this season, another piece in the growth of Anthony Edwards, and it's just good that nobody seems like they were seriously hurt, because when you swing a metal folding chair like that, someone could have gotten hurt pretty seriously. So we'll see how this all transpires, but a learning moment, I think, for Ant more than anything else, and we'll see if he is able to learn from it, and we'll see if next year's team is able to have a level of maturity that this year's team lacked. Couple final things on the NBA note. Not great that all this is happening. We're talking Wolves offseason right as Jimmy Butler's Heat and Tom Thibodeau's Knicks are advancing to the second round. Both of them 4-1 series wins. The Heat certainly more surprising. Butler, another massive game. I think he had 42. Giannis returned for the Bucks, but it didn't matter. They still could not handle Miami. Miami wins that series 4-1. Knicks win their series 4-1. Setting up to be a pretty good Eastern Conference semifinal between those two teams. Jimmy and Thibs going against each other in a certain way. I mean, Thibs obviously a coach. He's not going to be out on the court. That would be a little bit absurd. But just the fact that they are going to be playing each other and one of those teams is going to advance to the Eastern Conference Finals, that is pretty fun. So congrats to them. The years they had here were not terribly fun. I don't think anybody would say that. But you know what? To a certain degree, those guys have proven it more than the team that's still sticking around here, and that's a tough one to swallow to a certain degree. Finally, you're going to be staying up late for Wild Game 6 because Florida beat Boston, extended that series. Wild Game 6, 8:30. At least it's a Friday at Xcel Energy Center. You got the time. You don't got to get up probably on Saturday, so you can make it, but that's going to push that start time way up, probably more like 8:45, 8:50 before that puck drops. So Get your caffeine ready Friday. Get yourself ready for an elimination game, and we'll see if the Wild are able to force a Game 7 late into Friday evening. That will do it for me here today. Hope you enjoyed today's show. Sarah McClellan from the Star Tribune will join me tomorrow to talk more Wild and set up Game 6, and I'm sure I will have tons to say about whatever the Vikings do in the draft tonight. Thanks for joining me today. I'm Michael Rand. Back at it again tomorrow.